a 14-year-old girl walks into a room in Oregon and signs her name on a piece of paper nobody outside her family will ever see. No cameras, no headlines, just a signature. 7 years later, that same signature is at the center of a number so large that even the people who wrote it down are hedging their bets on whether it's real. $75 million. 10 years. And the strange part isn't the size of the figure. It's that Nike made this bet before she'd won a single professional match that mattered. Before Wimbledon. Before the wild card. Before anyone outside the Philippines could pronounce her name correctly. So, the question isn't really about tennis anymore. It's about what a company saw in a kid from Quezon City that the rest of the world hadn't even started looking for YET.in 2019, Alex Eala was training at the Rafa Nadal Academy, a name on a junior circuit spreadsheet, ranked number 1 in the world in her age group, fresh off a win at Les Petits, as sometimes called the Junior French Open, the tournament that has forecast future Grand Slam champions for decades. She had no ranking points on the WTA Tour, no sponsors chasing her, no reason, on paper, for a company the size of Nike to lock in a teenager years away from her professional debut. But somebody at Nike made a decision that year that looked, at the time, like a rounding error in a marketing budget. It would turn out to be one of the shrewdest long-term athlete bets in tennis history. For years, nothing about the partnership looked remarkable. Eala wore the swoosh through her junior Grand Slam breakthrough, becoming the first Filipino player, male or female, to win a junior Grand Slam singles title. She wore it during her WTA main draw debut in 2021. She wore it as she became the first Filipina to crack the world's top 100. It was steady, unspectacular, the kind of slow-burn investment that either quietly justifies itself over a decade or quietly disappears from a budget line. Then came March 2025, and everything about the calculation changed in the span of 9 days. Eala arrived at the Miami Open ranked 140th in the world, a wild card entry, the kind of name broadcasters have to double-check before pronouncing on air. 9 days later, she had beaten 3 players who'd each held a Grand Slam trophy: Yelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and the tour's reigning world number 2. 3 Grand Slam champions. 1 tournament, a ranking outside the top 100. Tennis doesn't produce runs like that often. And when it does, the sport's economics shift almost overnight. She became the first Filipino to beat multiple top 5 players in a single event, the first Filipina to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. And somewhere inside Nike's marketing division, a 7-year-old bet that had looked, at best, like patient philanthropy suddenly looked like foresight. What happened next wasn't really about tennis at all. It was about a gesture that most sponsorship departments would never have thought to make. When Eala walked out for her Wimbledon debut 2 months later, Nike didn't hand her a new shoe or a jersey with her name stitched on the back. They gave her a hair tie, a small, custom-made sampaguita, the national flower of the Philippines, with a handwritten note tucked beside it. Every dream begins as a seed, and what you plant, you'll one day reap. It's easy to miss how calculated that moment was. Dressed up as it was in sentiment, a global apparel giant had chosen, at the biggest stage in tennis, to hand a 20-year-old not a product, but a piece of home. She posted about it. The caption called the flower a reminder of where she came from. It pulled in over 125,000 likes within days, and something in the Philippines, a country that had spent years searching for its next sporting icon after Manny Pacquiao's shadow started to fade, locked onto her in a way that no amount of paid advertising could have manufactured. Here's where the story usually flattens into a highlight reel. Girl signs with brand. Girl wins matches. Girl becomes famous. But underneath the surface, something more calculated was happening. And it's worth pausing on because it explains everything that came after. Nike wasn't just rewarding Eala's results. They were building a permanent cultural bridge between the brand and an entire nation, one gesture at a time, and betting that the emotional return would outlast any single tournament win. A year later, at her second Wimbledon appearance, they did it again, this time with a visor embroidered with a Tagalog phrase, Kapag lumago, hindi na ito hihinto. Once it grows, it cannot be stopped. Filipino fans from Manila to Toronto to Dubai turned the phrase into a rallying cry, sharing it across timelines faster than any press release could have spread it. Eala later described what it meant to her simply, that carrying pieces of her culture onto a court like Wimbledon's felt like carrying the reason she existed as a player at all. That's not the kind of sentence a marketing department can manufacture. It's the kind of sentence a company spends years hoping an athlete will say, unprompted on their own. And that's the moment worth sitting with because it reframes everything that came before it. This was never simply a story about a tennis player getting endorsements. It was a story about a company that had figured out something most of its competitors hadn't, that in an era where audiences can smell a manufactured partnership from a mile away, the only sponsorships that actually move markets are the ones that feel like they were never about money at all. Every gesture Nike made toward Eala looked, on the surface, like sentiment. Underneath, it was a masterclass in patience paying compound interest. WY February 2026. Eala was flying to Nike's world headquarters in Oregon, where her portrait had been hung along the same tunnel that carries the images of the brand's global ambassadors across every sport it sponsors. A 17-year-old kid who'd once trained on borrowed time at an academy in Spain was now standing beneath her own face on a wall reserved for the athletes a multi-billion-dollar company had decided to build its identity around. Milo Philippines signed her that same month, framing her story as proof that a kid from a youth sports clinic could become a world champion. A message engineered to resonate with exactly the kind of grassroots audience Nike had already been courting for years. NutriAsia followed in July with a campaign built entirely around connecting her to Filipino youth. Globe and the Bank of the Philippine Islands joined the list. Vogue Philippines and Tatler Philippines put her on their pages. Forbes named her to their 30 Under 30 Asia list for 2026. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the projections on her total endorsement portfolio, Nike, Babolat, NutriAsia, and the rest crossed $3 million for the year, with Forbes confirming she'd become the highest-earning Filipino tennis player in history, adding over 54 million pesos in prize money on top of it. But numbers like that only tell half the story, because tennis has seen this movie before, and the ending isn't always a happy one. In 2021, a British teenager named Emma Raducanu won the US Open as a qualifier and became, almost overnight, one of the highest-earning female athletes on the planet. Tiffany & Company, Evian, British Airways, Vodafone, Dior, Porsche, HSBC, a portfolio that eventually cleared $15 million. It looked, at the time, exactly like what was now happening to Eala. And then injuries came. Coaching changes came. The commercial machine that had been built on the promise of consistent, visible success started to strain against a career that couldn't always deliver it. It's the quiet warning sitting underneath every headline about Eala's rise. Sponsorship money moves fast toward potential. And potential is the most fragile currency in professional sports. What makes Eala's trajectory look different, at least so far, is precisely the thing Raducanu's case exposed as missing durability. Since that Miami breakthrough, Eala has kept playing a full schedule. No prolonged absences. No coaching upheaval dominating the headlines. Just a steady accumulation of results. A WTA 500 title, a top 20 ranking, a title run at the DC Open, and by the summer of 2026, a doubles pairing at the Canadian Open with a name that turned an ordinary tournament into a cultural event. Because here's the detail that tournament organizers still talk about. When the Canadian Open confirmed that 21-year-old Eala would play doubles alongside 46-year-old Venus Williams, 14 Grand Slam doubles titles, a legend by any measure, tickets for the match sold out in 30 minutes. the event had to be moved to center court to accommodate the demand. Thousands of Filipino fans packed the stadium, turning a doubles match, historically one of tennis's least watched formats, into one of the tournament's most valuable properties. The tournament director called her presence a gift to the sport. But what he was really describing, without quite saying it, was the collision of two commercial forces, a legend nearing the end of her career and a rising star who had, in the space of 18 months, become one of the most bankable names in women's tennis. For Nike, the timing landed with an almost uncomfortable precision. Emma Raducanu had recently begun shifting her sponsorship relationships elsewhere, and reports, still unconfirmed by either party, began circulating that Nike was preparing to lock Eala into a 10-year extension worth as much as $75 million. Whether that exact figure ever becomes public record is almost beside the point. What matters is that a brand which once made a quiet, low-stakes bet on an unproven 14-year-old was now reportedly prepared to commit $750 million pesos spread across a decade to keep her wearing the swoosh. That's not a sponsorship anymore. That's succession planning, a company trying to secure its next global face before the rest of the industry realizes what it already knows. And maybe that's the real story hiding underneath all the flowers and handwritten notes and viral Instagram captions. It was never really about a hair tie or a visor or a t-shirt designed by a Filipino artist to mark a Wimbledon debut. It was about a company that understood, years before anyone else did, that the biggest returns in sports marketing don't come from chasing an athlete after they've already broken through. They come from finding them before the world is watching and staying loyal long enough that when the breakthrough finally happens, it doesn't feel like a transaction. It feels like a homecoming. Alex Eala is still only 21. The US Open is still ahead of her. And somewhere in Oregon, the people who signed a 14-year-old 7 years ago are watching the numbers climb, knowing that the real bet was never about who she'd become on the court. It was about whether the rest of the world would ever catch up to what they saw first.